Hi everybody, Jesse Fewell here, totally excited to be a part of IIL's Agile and Scrum, driving success through innovation. Hashtag AgileCon16. We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about big Agile, Agile at scale. Let's get into it. Now we wanna start first by setting the stage a little bit. This is going to be an intermediate level talk, so we're going to not cover Agile basics. We won't be discussing the mechanics of a given methodology or some of those techniques. We are going to be assuming that you're familiar with some of these methodologies like Scrum or extreme programming. We'll touch on them a little bit about what they're about, but we need some expectation about being comfortable with large programs as well, so that we can have this conversation about reconciling these two different concepts. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to first discuss the problem. Why is this a problem? Where does this come from? The fact that big Agile really doesn't make sense. And then we're going to go through some specific examples and techniques that people are using and things that people are doing in the real world today. And finally, we're going to wrap up extracting out some principles that matter regardless of your context, regardless of your environment, your industry, when you're trying to scale this thing up. So that's the agenda, that's the plan. Let's kind of get into it a little bit with the problem. So wait a second, Agile for big programs, Agile for big initiatives? That doesn't make any sense. That sounds problematic because everything we've ever learned about team science and collaboration and management and leadership says that the ideal size of a team is 7 people plus or minus 2. This diagram comes to us from a study back in 2011 that asserted that there's an optimum curve for the number of people you have. The more people on your team that you have, the more communication and complexity is involved, because you're talking about 2 to the n communication arcs. The fewer people you have on the team, you may not have enough talent. You may not have enough of skill to cover all the things that need to get done. So this is what we've been hearing and learning for a long time, even in the military, where we start decomposing a large unit into small teams. And this was codified with the Agile movement that started happening in the mid-90s, where we started hearing about these lightweight methods like extreme programming that emphasize small teams coming together and rapidly experimenting and rapidly trying new things and having more ownership over their work. Because if there was a lot of overhead, if there were large organizations, there would be policies and there would be compliance and there would be reports, and it'd be really hard to be adaptive and nimble and move quickly because there's a lot of this overhead. So extreme programming was one of the first out of the gate that started to popularize these lightweight methodologies, these lightweight frameworks for doing work. And it had some controversial topics and techniques, and so as a result, it started to die out in popularity, and then we started hearing about Scrum. Scrum is awesome. Scrum is basically starting off with a plan, and then we do some work, and then we take a look at the output of that work, and then we make some conclusions, kind of like the scientific method. Well, how many people do you need doing a scientific experiment? Again, the answer is 7 people plus or minus 2. And we have an emphasis now on self-organization and about clear-cut roles and responsibilities in Scrum. But again, the emphasis is on small teams, that small teams do big things, beautiful things, amazing things. And so with the advent of Scrum now coming into popularity in the late 90s and the early 2000s, this is, again, a conversation that's continuing on, that this is what Agile is about. Until in the last 5 to 10 years. And over the last 5 to 10 years, we're starting to hear more and more of a conversation about how do we apply these principles, these ideas, to larger organizations. Okay, it's great if you've got a Tiger team or a SWAT team or a tactical technician, tactical do-it team, whatever you want to call them, but I don't work there. I work at Acme Corps, or I work in the federal government. And it's just, there's a lot of things that are just bigger. So if, for example, we've got headcount. Headcount, we have just from a couple of people to hundreds of people. And if you're telling me that on my program of 70 people, the ideal team size is 7 plus or minus 2, I've got 10 teams. with 10 leads and 10 business sponsor representatives. And how do you Agile that? Or maybe big to you means the geography, where we're no longer centralized in one office, we're distributed all across the globe. Or maybe big might mean that it's not just one company, we've got multiple vendors in place, that we've got different kinds of organizations and contracts that are coming in between us and prohibiting our collaboration. And maybe it's the complexity of what the problem that we're trying to solve. It's not just a new HR enrollment system. We're talking about fully automated automobiles that are driving themselves. That's a complex problem. And the technology we're using today is not the technology we were using 20 years ago when this Agile thing started off. And so this slide comes to us from one of the Agile people out there that's advocating for this conversation. His name is Scott Ambler, and he was the first one to, I think, identify that big is in the eye of the beholder. So what we're talking about, this problem of how do we preserve awesomeness? How do we achieve better results with what Agile is promising? Agile promises that we're going to get results out to market faster, that we're going to have higher morale, and as a result of higher morale, higher productivity, and as a result of higher productivity, higher quality, better customer alignment, customer satisfaction. How do you do that when you work in a big, bloated, large organization? So this is the problem that we're trying to explore because it creates a tension. We have a tension that's pulling us in two different directions. Agile is really about simplicity. It's actually called out in the Agile Manifesto. Again, something that maybe you've heard about or read about. And when we're trying to get simplicity, we might end up coming up with a lot of standardization. And that standardization and standards and policies might feel like micromanaging. And when we start to simplify our organization by grouping people in the same skill sets, suddenly now we've got silos. And nobody want to work together with those people. Those people don't do what I do. What I do is perfect. And then maybe when we have more standards, we feel constricted and we're not able to innovate. We're not able to color outside the lines a little bit. That's what happens when we try to enforce simplicity at scale. We start getting these externalities, these side effects. On the other hand, we have this other Agile principle of self-organizing empowered teams that are making decisions on the ground. Why? Because they're the ones doing the work. And if they're the ones doing the work, they've got the skills, they're in touch and contact with the problem at hand. And so let's encourage more autonomy across the entire organization, a large program. And now all of a sudden we've got role confusion. Who's in charge? Who makes the decision about whether we go in this direction or that direction? Well, let's have a committee. And now we have decision by consensus, which means we have no decision. That might create a bit of a frustration. And then if everyone's fully autonomous and self-organizing, you got these guys over here, they're doing their social media initiative, and these guys are doing their social media initiative, they're self-organizing, and these guys are doing it. We just doubled and tripled the amount of work we're doing for the same thing. We got a lot of duplication going on. And so that can't be a good thing. And then when we have a lot of self-organization going around, you're going to find out that these guys want to use the time flux capacitor technology, and these guys want to use the full wave rectifier technology, and then these guys over here want to use duct tape and baling wire, and they just self-organize themselves into a ditch. There's too much variety, there's too much variation in the organization. And so we have this tension that the more we want to preserve simplicity at scale, the more we combat against autonomy. And the more we want autonomy at scale, the more we combat against simplicity. And so this is kind of the paradox that we're having to face as we start to get this thing out into a larger scale, a larger conversation, domain, if you will. Now what we want to do is explore two different sides of this problem. It might be that you're starting off from a place of being in a small startup, where we're a group of people that really enjoy working together. And we're delivering amazing results. There's a lot of energy. Everyone's wearing multiple hats because we're in a startup. And we start to grow. We start to scale the organization by adding a new team over here. And we're able to preserve our culture as we add a new department over here. And we're able to preserve the sense of what it means to be a high-performing, small, dynamic entity by adding another competency over here. So this is the problem that was facing companies like Zappos and Spotify. Zappos is famous for its culture, and as it started to grow, they had to find a way to preserve their outputs without compromising who they were. Likewise, with Spotify, is made famous with their scaling methodology, they faced a very specific problem, which is how do we preserve what makes us unique and special as we start to scale the organization as a result of growth? This is a decidedly different problem than if you're starting from a different place. It might be that you already work at Acme Corp, and there's a lot of policies and a lot of reports and a lot of bureaucratic overhead, and then there's the other silo on the third floor, and they have the same kind of droll day in, day out. And then over here we've got another PMO who's frustrated because they're trying to drive results, and there's all kinds of compliance and micromanaging, and it's just not a good place to be, except there's one little Agile outpost over here. And these guys are trying to bring a very large organization to a different way of working, where now, instead of being a large non-Agile organization, we start seeing people kind of moving over to a better way of working, collaborating more effectively, getting more results out the door, producing higher quality output, more stakeholder alignment. And look at all this. Now we're collaborating across silos, and this original Agile outpost is now inspired and motivated to transition. So what we're seeing here is two sides of this problem. Either you're from a small Agile and you're trying to scale out to be a bigger organization and preserve your agility as you grow, or you're kind of in a large organization, a large program, a large initiative already, and there's one little Agile experiment that's trying to move the whole organization over. These are two very different problems that require two very different organizational change strategies. And I've mentioned already the Zappos and the Spotify example. I want to spend a little bit more time digging in to these guys over here. Now we are going to explore some specific case studies about who's doing this and how they're doing it. The first example I want to share with you is a very quickly and rapidly growing popular method called the Scaled Agile Framework. I've been through this training, and I'm licensed to teach this, and it's a fascinating way to take the Agile principles and techniques into a large organization because you have a lot of techniques to choose from. I like to say that the Scaled Agile Framework is an inventory, almost like a catalog, of a lot of really good ideas and things that you can do in an organization to make that shift from being big non-Agile to being big Agile. And there's some controversy around it being maybe a little bit too prescriptive. Maybe it leans a little bit more on that simplicity side of standardizing too much too soon. But I can tell you that one organization used it pretty effectively, and one of their case studies is with Intel. Here's the story. They already had several Agile pilot teams in place. They had been experimenting with this in a couple places in the organization. And then they said, you know what? It's time. It's time to roll this out to 170 teams. It's like 2,500 people, and they did it in 2 months. So this is just a massive kind of rollout, and it's consistent with a principle that where you do an experimentation, and once you've validated an idea, you apply as much energy to implementing that idea as possible. How did they do it? Well, the first thing is they started to discuss, how do we create some simplicity without removing the autonomy? Let's have all of our programs be in the same business unit. So we're not competing for portfolio initiatives. We're not competing for key business sponsors. We're not competing for funds because it's all allocated to a specific business unit. Also, we've got a global organization. What do we do about that? It's difficult, and you know what? Let's form our organization such that we have a maximum of 2 work sites with at least 3 hours of collaboration time across those time zones. They intentionally designed the program resource matrix around these constraints. And then once they designed it, they said, okay, now how do we move forward? And they trained all of the leadership roles, not just in Agile concepts and Agile principles, but in the specific kind of Agile techniques that they were going to be using, the Scaled Agile Framework. And it yielded amazing results. They were able to produce the kind of outputs that they wanted at scale. Another story comes from another framework that's also gaining some popularity, and that's large-scale Scrum. I've been through this training as well, And this promises to be a little bit less prescriptive. Maybe it leans a little bit more on the autonomy side than on the simplicity side, as far as standardizing not too much. And some people say, well, no, actually, what they're advocating here is that everyone in a program of 100 people is in the same sprint. And we divide that into sub-teams, and those sub-teams each have their specific part of the product that they're working on, and they all share the same review, demo, presentation at the end of a handful of weeks. They do private lessons learned meetings, retrospectives, and then they have a meta lessons learned meeting. And so there's some specific techniques around this that's a little bit different in emphasis. And so the lesson I want you to learn here is that there's more than one way to do this. You've got one school that has a large inventory and catalog of techniques, and then you have another school over here that has a more narrow set of techniques to encourage a little bit more self-organizing, a little bit more exploring of the specifics. And one company that's really been pushing this forward is Nokia Networks, not the cell phone company, the cellular network company, two different Nokias. And this company started experimenting with this large-scale Scrum approach to scaling their agility, scaling the results, back in 2005. And that pilot went pretty well, and they said, you know what? It's time. It's time for us to move forward. And they said, well, let's take our 2 R&D sites, 500 people, and then let's make this the consistent way of approaching the way we do work. And they had results. Anecdotally, everyone agreed that it was easier to adapt to changing plans. They removed a lot of unneeded overhead that was a result of silos and documentation-based communication, and had a little bit more dynamic kind of output as a result of that. That sounds great. How did they do it? Well, the first thing they did is they identified who the leadership team would be to scale this out. And they said, hey, I want you to come over here and take a look at how we're doing it over on this pilot and this pilot. And so the leadership got engaged very early at the silos, or the oases, the outposts that were doing this Agile thing first. And then they had an expert coach embedded on that leadership team. It's not just the workers that need to be coached up. It's the leadership that needs to be coached up too. And then everyone on the leadership team participated in the training that they were rolling out. Notice that was the exact same principle that was used in the Scaled Agile Framework example for Intel. So we're starting to see some common patterns, some common principles that regardless of which commercial methodology you want to use, there's some consistencies around what it takes to roll this out in a large organization effectively to yield the results you're going for. So let's talk about that. What kind of principles are you seeing, Jesse? What is it that's common regardless of the industry, regardless of the methodology that you're putting into place? And the first one we want to talk about is a team-first identity. Team first. This is so hard in a large organization where we're siloed up the wazoo, where we have the head creative guy, we have the head engineering guy, we've got the head process PMO person, and I've got my direct reports, and I tell them what to do. Well, you know what? It's time to move away from your organizational identity to your team identity, where people are self-organizing on Team Alpha, and they're multi-skilled. Not everybody can do anything. Those people don't exist. There's no such thing as a master of all trades, jack of none. That doesn't make any sense. Instead, we're talking about having like really good people that give you coverage over the skills that you need to get something done, and using a lot of the small Agile techniques and support and books and conferences that are out there, all the materials out there that support small team Agile, leverage that. It all starts with teams. I'll just go ahead and say it. If you haven't figured out Agile at the team level, you have no business trying to scale. You're not ready. You have nothing to draw on. You have nothing to point to that say, you know what, Agile works at least someplace here. Figure it out first at the team level, and then you have some data points that you can use, that you can leverage and multiply that out. Team first identity, team first piloting. Principle number one. Principle number two is that we have to start looking at collaborative policies. Let's say that you've got an organization that's built on teams that comprise programs, and programs that comprise the enterprise or a large portfolio. And for each one of these levels, we're torn Do we want to favor simplicity and standardization, or do we want to favor autonomy and self-organization? Well, at the enterprise level, we're pretty standardized on the vision. This is where we're going. We have a senior executive, but I'm going to delegate to you guys at the program level what methodology, what schedules, what assignments you're going to do. You guys figure that out. I'm the chief executive. I don't care about those details. And then at the program level, we have, okay, well, for this entire program, we will be using the Scaled Agile framework, or we will be using large-scale Scrum, or we will be using whatever it is. But we're going to delegate down to the teams. They're going to let them self-organize in an autonomous fashion their own daily schedules and their own assignments. And then when we get to the team level, we're going to decide as a team, we're having our daily stand-up at 12 noon. That's when we're having it. It's a standard. It's an expectation of us as a team. We're going to be having our demos every second Tuesday. That's what we've agreed as a team. But we're going to delegate to each individual person their own assignments and how they want to get them done. I don't care if you have to go to the doctor's office or if you have to go to daycare, as long as you get your work done, however you self-organize it. So we want to have a principle where there are some things that are appropriately standardized for a given part of for a given spectrum of the organization, and other things that are delegated down. Delegate, delegate, delegate. The more you delegate, the more bandwidth your leadership has to focus on things that need their attention for standardizing vision and standardizing ways of working. The next principle we want to talk about is cadence. Cadence is critical. If we've got a team alpha, team beta, team gamma self-organizing the way that they want to do work, well, we're working on a 2-week schedule, well, we're working on a 3-week schedule, so that means we only align every 6 weeks. Oh, that's okay, but the team beta, they don't have any schedule, they're doing Kanban, or whatever the heck that is. And so there's no deadlines, there's no alignment, there's no milestones. You know what we need? We need to be on the same page. We need to be on the same page about what is going to be done by when, so that we can forecast when do I need stuff from alpha, because alpha is producing stuff that beta needs. And so we got to forecast this out with some midterm planning. I'm not talking about doing the microscopic person-by-person assignments 12 months in advance. It's not what we're talking about. Things change. You don't want to do that. But you do want to have some high-level, near-term, midterm planning so that we can be on the same page about these cadence. And I'll tell you what, it creates a unity and alignment when we know that on the 4th Thursday of every month, that's demo day for the whole program. That's demo day. No work is getting done that day. No meetings are happening that day, no assignments happening, because it's demo day, all hands. That creates a lot of unity, a lot of alignment, a lot of program identity. Team cadence aligned across a program, critical principle. Another one we want to talk about is organizational design. There's a lot of people that say, you know what, we'll be agile as long as we don't change anything. Well, how's that working for you? We've got to start changing how we allocate people to programs, how we allocate people to teams, and then we've got to have this idea around how do we have a consistent engineering strategy? How do we have a consistent creative strategy? How do we have a consistent product ownership strategy? And it might be that we have to form a center of excellence, a community of practice, a guild. And these are not departments. Please don't do that. We're trying to move away from micromanaging people's assignments so that we can delegate to them the innovation on the ground that needs to happen. We're talking about something that's organic and informal. So maybe you're the chief manager, you're the chief engineering officer, and you're used to telling everybody exactly what to do. And as a result, you really haven't built a competency for engineering. Or you're the chief creative officer and you're used to telling everybody what to do, explicit person, and then you do this for that program, you do this for that project, and you haven't really built a self-organized competency. And so as soon as you start delegating down, you reveal systemic gaps. We don't have enough talent in this organization. It's time to fill those gaps. We don't have enough knowledge sharing in this organization across all the engineers. We need to fill those gaps. And so what you're doing as a leader, as a departmental leader, if you're the chief engineering officer, the chief creative officer, the chief product officer, you're moving away from directing tasks to building competencies. And it's hard because you may not have been trained on how to do that. You may have gotten to that promotion because of your technical skills and not because of your soft skills, because of your organizational design skills. And so this is something that you might have to start asking HR about. You might have to start asking your Agile transformation contact, whoever it is that's driving this Agile strategy. You know, I'm pretty good in the management role that I've been doing for the last 15 years, but you're asking me to shift my focus from telling people how to do a good technical job to building an environment where they can do a good technical job on their own. And that's non-trivial. So, organizational design, it has to be a consideration as you start to change who you were into who you want to be. And then finally, leadership competency. As I touched on this in the last principle, so many of us who've been through PMP boot camp, who've been through MBA school, or who've climbed the ladder one year after the other year, we've had it drilled into our heads that management is about coordination. Management is about finding the right people, inserting them at the right place at the right time, and as soon as that's done, let's yank them out of here and throw them over there, and we move people to work. What we want to do now is we want to switch that up. We've got to start thinking that if we want the results that Agile promises in the way of higher morale, and which gives us higher productivity and higher quality, which means we get out to market faster, we have to switch from being management as a coordination activity to management as an enablement activity, where management now is funding training. Management is funding offsites. Management is funding knowledge sharing through tools and through collaboration, to where you're building an organization more than executing work as a manager. And that's a massive shift, and it's going to take time. This is not how we've been conditioned over 15 years. In fact, this is probably not why you were promoted to the position that you're in right now. And so it's true. The rules are changing on us. And so the question that is left for you is, are you going to adapt, manager? Are you going to shift? Are you going to pivot? Are you going to innovate your career in order to be an innovator in your organization? One more thing to bring to your attention is that the fact that this leadership development is something that the Scrum Alliance has identified as a new competency that needs to be recognized and honed and nurtured. And they've just announced the Certified Agile Leadership Program, where there are 2 levels of credential recognizing your growth as an organizational leader in an Agile direction. Remember, this is not easy. This is going to take work. And so the Scrum Alliance has responded to that dynamic by saying, if you're looking to scale agility across an organization, then you need to scale leadership across the organization. Because that leadership is going to create the space and the opportunity for us to get the competency development, for us to fill those talent gaps. It's going to fill the space for us to build those teams to produce better results. So I strongly recommend you take a look at the Certified Agile Leadership Program as a way to scale leadership in your organization in order to scale agility in your organization. So to wrap up, 3 key parts of this conversation. First one was about the problem. It's multidimensional. It's not just about headcount. It's not just about geography. It's not just about contractors and vendors. It's not just about the complexity of the problems we're trying to solve. It's all of these things. But the one part of the problem that we can kind of wrestle with is kind of a 2-part, where either we're a small company that's trying to preserve our agility as we scale, or we're a large company that doesn't have a lot of Agile stuff going for us, and we're trying to shift the whole boat in that Agile direction. Understand the 2 different problems, because it requires 2 different kinds of research. Research, do your homework, please. Do your homework, find out the other Agile methods that are available to you, the frameworks. I just shared a couple of them. And then learn from others. Learn from Zappos, and from Spotify, and from Intel, and from Nokia. Learn from them and how they're doing it, and so that you can start to identify and extract out the common patterns, having a team-first identity, aligning our cadence, and making some intentional decisions about organizational design, and then building a leadership competency. So hopefully this was helpful information for you to take away, giving you some things to look into, some things to try. But in case you haven't noticed, this is hard and it's not easy. So feel free to reach out to myself or to IIL, and maybe we can help you move forward along on this journey of moving from big to awesome.